Well, good God, it's that time of the week again, ladies and gentlemen, where I read something else. Now, this one looks relatively innocuous. It's just called 3 o'clock, parentheses, on the dot. We got Captain America, we got Iron Man. This one is topical because Endgame just recently came out. I know that that dates the video, but I don't really care. It's also rather unfortunate to consider that this is the first fanfiction I'm reading where the characters were acted by real people who have a chance of... Well, that's not true. The Harry Potter one had real people. But this one is the first one where, like, real people come up to mind first. Which is unfortunate for a lot of reasons. Firstly, because I now have to picture real people in this scenario, and secondly, it also reminds me that these are human beings, and someone wrote this about them. That being said, this is scat. So this might get to be just as bad or worse than Sally Acorn's Amazingly Messy Day. I have my new and improved bucket here with me, just in case I have need of it. I'm hoping I do not. But without further ado, let's get into the author's notes. Summary. After a joke gone wrong, Steve, Clint, and Bruce find out about one of Tony's kinks. It turns out that Steve likes it too. I actually didn't know who Clint was. I had to look it up. That's Hawkeye, for any of you that really don't care that much about the Avengers and only watch the really major releases. Notes for 50 Shades of Stony. Written from this prompt, could you write one where Tony has a scat fetish and Steve takes a healthy one on his chest? Yes, this is a scat fetish fic, aka shit. Yes, it is graphic. You've been warned. Baited by the lovely 50 Shades of Stony. I love you and thank you for helping me brainstorm. See the end of the work for more notes. This had 12,000 views. This has 12,000 views on the website where this content was given to me from. Steve, Bruce, and Clint were spending some quality time in the living room of Stark Tower, drinking beers as they browsed on the internet. A month had passed since the awkward-sounding incident, and now that Tony and Steve were back on good terms, he felt comfortable enough to have some of his fellow Avengers over. This took place. This was written in 2012, so the movies that were out at that time are the movies that we're basing this on. While Steve invited Tony to join them, his fiancée declined, saying that he had some work to finish in the lab. Tony had spent almost every day with Steve to make it up to his partner and kick his sounding habit, and now that several weeks had passed, Tony was allowed to suspend time in his lab again. To spend time in his lab again, pardon. While Steve was relieved that things had improved with Tony, he still wished his partner would have joined them. It frustrated him that Tony wanted to be alone rather than spend time with his fellow Avengers, as Steve saw it as an important part of team bonding. Worst of all, he was terrified that Tony was going to sound himself again. They hadn't fucked since Steve caught him in the act of using ROB because Steve was worried about hurting his fiance's cock. Excuse me? Excuse me, what? Is Pepper Mail here? Is that... Carrying on. He was still paranoid about what Tony was doing in the lab, though he didn't want to admit it. Is ROB the robotic operating buddy from fucking Super Smash Brothers, or is that a different ROB? When Clint suggested playing a little prank on Tony, however, Steve's emotion-rattled brain gave the Archer's plan some serious consideration. Maybe it would get Tony to leave the lab and push the thoughts of his partner sounding out of his head. What the fuck does sounding mean? I really don't know. Steve, do you really think this is a good idea? You and Tony just made up, and Bruce was cut off by Clint as he shoved his left hand into the scientist's face to shut him up. You have to do it now. You can't back out. Now just send him the video and have Jarvis film him while he watches it, and we'll post his reaction video on YouTube. Come on, it'll be hilarious to see Tony freak out, said Steve. Before Steve could respond, Clint clicked the send button on one of the holograms, sending the controversial video to Tony's email. Clint, no, Steve yelled as he put his hand up to the hologram, but there was no way he could unsend the message. Calm down, Steve. Everything will be fine. We don't watch him and we won't post it on the internet. You two can talk about it later, Bruce said reassuringly as he glared over at Clint, who simply rolled his eyes in response. We're still going to watch it. Jarvis, live stream Tony's reaction for us and don't let Steve tell you otherwise, the Archer demanded. Immediately they saw the brunette, they spelled it wrong, face. Tony had just opened up his Stark Mail TM account on a hologram in front of his workbench and immediately noticed a message from Steve titled, Love You. He smiled a little and raised his left eyebrow in curiosity as he tapped the message and opened the hyperlink in the message. He heard the piano music begin to play and watched wide-eyed as two women came onto the screen. Is this fucking Two Girls, One Cup? Tony had heard about the video several years ago, but had never actually bothered to watch it. He'd tossed the subject matter of the video around his head about how it would go with Steve, how the topic could be approached, and whether or not his partner would be willing. But for the most part, Tony repressed the idea, as he damn well should. As he watched, his cock began to harden, and he quickly unbuttoned his jeans, allowing his cut dick to spring free. He spit on his right hand, we're switching sides, and began to rub the head of his cock with his thumb as he watched the two girls. Tony wasn't all that interested in the women. Rather, he was aroused by what they were doing. Their tongues moved in swirling motions around a shared item, and as they spit up and swallowed the object of their sexual needs, Tony lost it and came all over the workbench. I didn't know Tony was so kinky, Steve. Damn, you're crazy to keep him around. Clint howled with laughter as he looked over at Bruce, who was vomiting profusely in the corner of the room, as I may soon be with this bucket that I've brought with me. Steve's face turned a deep shade of red as he ordered Jarvis to stop filming. When he looked at the two separate reactions to his fiancée's private endeavors, he felt sick. Even though Steve was still upset about the events a few weeks prior, this was the last thing he wanted. He didn't want his teammates to know anything about their kinks, with the exception of Bruce, who joined them in their sexual escapades on occasion. Before watching the reaction video, Steve had no clue that this was something that turned Tony on. For one, Steve didn't know this particular kink existed. While he knew people could be turned on by bodily fluids like urine and saliva, never in a minute would he think that people would want to bring that into their sex play. He wasn't sure how he felt about the idea. It was unsanitary, squishy, difficult to clean up, and smelly. Would they need to have special sheets covering their bed? Would Tony want him to wear gloves, an apron, and a mask like a doctor? Was there more than just the act itself that turned Tony on? He knew that they were going to have to talk about it, and he absolutely dreaded it. Before that could happen, however, he needed to get rid of Bruce and Clint. I hope that Robert Downey Jr. and Chris whatever never see this. I hope that no one ever sees this, although apparently 12,000 people already have if the count on that website is accurate. But carrying on. Get out, Steve said coldly as he stood up, folding his arms against his chest and glared at Clint. Come on, I want to see how you're going to act when Tony comes up. Clint continued to laugh, though he flinched a little when he saw that scowl on Steve's face. This is between me and Tony. Now this doesn't leave this living room. Clint, and that's an order. Take Bruce home right now. I'm not going to say it again. Steve growled as he continued his stare down with Clint, and eventually the archer backed off and led Bruce to the elevator. You know what? This is the second fanfiction I've ever read that follows the grammatical rule of having a paragraph break during dialogue. So that is, if I remember, one more point to dialogue at the end of this. Hey, where are you two going? The party hasn't even arrived yet. Did you get bored with Steve? Bruce, are you okay? Clint, what happened to him? Too much beer? Tony asked in concern when the elevator stopped on his floor and opened. We think he's sick with the flu or something. He was looking kind of green. Not like Hulk green, but I'm gonna puke green. And eventually he just blew chunks all over the carpet. Ugh. There's a lot of it, so you should probably help Steve. Clint answered without hesitation as the elevator went down to the ground level floor, and the archer dragged Bruce out and waved bye to Tony as the doors closed. Okay, Bruce never gets sick, and Clint looked like he was laughing or crying, and Steve sent me that video about 10 minutes ago. Are you fucking kidding me? Tony put the pieces together and realized exactly what occurred upstairs. Steve, you son of a bitch! That's a good response. Tony snarled as he stomped over at Steve, who was sanitizing his hands after cleaning up Bruce's vomit. What's wrong, Tony? Steve asked innocently as he put the bottle of sanitizer on the coffee table and gave his partner his undivided attention. First off, how did you know that was one of my kinks? And second, why did you share that information with Clint and Bruce? You know Clint's gonna tell everyone. Tony yelled as he forcefully poked his left finger into Steve's chest, causing the larger man to move back slightly. You know, I brought it up before that often in fanfiction, people use characters as an excuse not to have to write a personality. But this is worse than that, because in this they've used characters simply so that they can include characters from a famous work, not because those characters and their related abilities or personalities matter to the story at all. Tony, until I saw what you did when you were watching it, I had no idea, and I didn't want to send it to you. Clint pressed send before I could tell him no. We were going to play a practical joke on you, and we were going to make a reaction video, but it just went into a direction I didn't expect. The blonde answered in embarrassment and shame as he moved Tony's hand and brought him into an embrace. That's my point about this. Like, probably that's going to be the least egregious thing that happens in this entire reading. I hope it is, but that doesn't make me not disappointed. Don't touch me, Steve. You already made me feel bad enough about me stuffing my cock, and I really don't want to hear what you have to say about this. I didn't ever want you to know about this, and now everyone does. Congratulations on a prank well done, Steve. Tony pushed away from Steve, muttering something along the lines of, fuck you, and rushed out of the room, leaving Steve to think about his actions. I'm thinking about my actions. I'm thinking about how I got here. I'm thinking about why I'm doing this, and I'm telling you, I'm having a hard time coming up with justifications or a reason. He did feel terrible about his harsh reaction towards Tony in regard to his sounding addiction. What the fuck is sounding? I'm gonna pause the recording. No. We're gonna look up sounding together. I'm gonna open up the Google and look up what sounding is on Urban Dictionary. Okay, we got loading, sounding. The practice of inserting plastic or metal sounds, long, thin, and very smooth objects, into yours or someone else's urethra, ultimately leads to stretching of the urethra so that larger objects, such as a finger, can be inserted in the penis. You know what? I regret having looked up what that meant. Where were we? Tony in regard to his sounding addiction, but it was one kink that was simply too much for Steve. The fact that he stuck his finger inside of such a sensitive part. Oh, so I didn't even need to look it up. Not meant to hold anything for that other than anything for than cum or urine made him feel sick, and there were times he had thrown up a little in his mouth at the thought. He couldn't bear to see Tony do that to himself again, and if he could replace the brunette's love of sounding with a different kink, he'd do it. When Steve finally went to bed at 11 at night, he found Tony lying naked on his stomach with his face in the blonde's pillow. He was muttering something to himself, and as Steve quietly approached the bed, Tony picked up his head and glanced over at his partner. Tony, I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't tell me what you liked. I was just so upset that you were enjoying a robot more than you were me. And just because I don't like sounding doesn't mean I'm going to hate everything you want. Steve's voice trailed off as he sat down on the edge of the bed and ran his fingers affectionately through Tony's messy brown hair. Yeah, I'm starting to suspect that the ROB reference at the beginning is actually referring to the Nintendo character, because I really can't think of what else it could be within the MCU. It's over, Cap. Let's just stop talking about it and go to sleep, Tony muttered as he got up from his belly side down position and sat on the edge of the bed with Steve. No, we're not done talking about it. What do we need to do to set this up? I'm willing to do it if this is something you want, Steve answered confidently, though in a calm and soft tone of voice as he wrapped his arms around Tony. You're sure you're down for this, Steve? It's okay if you're not. I really do understand. It's not exactly the sexiest thing. The brunette mumbled into Steve's right bicep before placing a tender kiss to his rough flesh. Tony, as long as it's not sounding, I'm okay with it. You do pee on me to get me off. And this is just another thing that comes out of the human body. I'll give the author credit. He hasn't said it yet. He hasn't said it yet, and I appreciate that he hasn't said it yet, but he's gonna fucking say it at some point. Steve reassured the smaller man as he pulled him down onto the bed, planting several tender kisses to his lips before they drifted off to sleep. When Tony woke up the next afternoon, he realized that he was sleeping on the couch. He wasn't sure how he'd gotten there, and the fact that Steve wasn't alongside him made him uncomfortable. The last thing he remembered was being curled up in his fiance's big, muscular arms, fast asleep on their king-size mattress. The living room was a little chilly, so he wrapped a black fleece blanket around his naked body and walked back to their bedroom, and was surprised by what he found. I'm about to turn the page. Before I turn the page, why? Somebody did this. Somebody wrote this, and they actually apparently put in work here because there's relatively few errors up until this point. And then 12,000 people read this and thought that it was good, or at least enough people to vote on it so that it came up front page on this particular website good. But let's turn the page and see where it leads us. Is this a good setup, Tony? I did some research while you were asleep, and I put a mattress bag over our mattress and brought my old sheets from my apartment to use, since I don't care what happens to them. Is there anything else I need to do? Steve asked nervously as he finished spreading the dingy yellow sheets over their bed. Steve, you don't need to do this. Really, it's fine. Tony swallowed hard as he looked at Steve's naked body and imagined him sprawled out on the sheets, covered in his own bodily excretions. Tony, I want to. Remember that I can say Kanye West anytime I don't think I can handle it, and you're not forcing me into this. Why the fuck is Kanye West a safe word? Of all the things in this up to this point, that might be the most questionable beyond everything. And you know what that means, Steve smirked as he motioned for Tony to come over to him. Tony, excited that in less than 10 minutes he'd be living out this particular kink for the first time in his life, dropped his blanket and walked over to the closet. He pulled out a small shoebox, opened it, and pulled out a small spray bottle. So this is the first time, but he came prepared. What is that? Steve asked as he watched Tony bring the small black spray bottle to the bed with him. It disinfects shit. Literally. It doesn't take away the smell or the taste. The taste! But at least when we're doing this, we won't have to worry about getting sick. And Steve, I'll just admit that I already love the way your shit smells. And I'm hoping it tastes just as good. The brunette answered with a wink as he hopped into the middle of the bed and sat flat on his back, and Steve got on top of him. You know, I gave a warning before turning the page previously, but we're doing it again. Please stop reading this. Me. Steve kissed Tony delicately as he felt his bowels rumble and the impending need to defecate. He didn't want to press his lips too hard against Tony's. The blonde was struggling to keep his asshole clenched up as it was, and focusing on his partner's lips would severely hinder his ability to hold it in. Can I get citation needed? Citation needed. Does kissing someone make you need to shit your pants? I don't know. I don't think it does. If anyone in the audience thinks it does, please keep that to yourself. Tony could sense that his fiancée had to go, and he whispered some directions into Steve's ear. He nodded in response and slowly crawled off of Tony's body. Steve stood up with his ass facing in Tony's direction and brought his legs alongside either side of the small man's body and crouched down, giving the brunette, that's 3, a perfect view. Tony's cock sprang to life as he focused his attention on Steve's hairy asshole and licked his lips the moment the blonde's hole began to open. And you know what? At least we're not using the term anal ring looking at you, Ginny. He watched in sheer euphoric delight as Steve defecated, pushing out a long, smooth piece of shit directly onto the arc reactor. Forgot about that particular piece of biology. As the warm bodily excretion curdled on his chest, Tony quickly grabbed the spray to his right and sprayed it, killing all of the bacteria in the process, because that's what we need to be worried about here. After the harmful microbes were eradicated, Tony was able to completely enjoy the sight in front of him. He took a long, deep breath, enjoying the gamey, sweet smell of Steve's feces. In his entire life, he'd never met anyone whose shit smelled so strongly, yet pleasantly at the same time, and Tony sometimes wondered if that's why he wanted to try this so much. Nothing ever smelled that incredible to him, and he found himself wishing that there was a cologne he could create that replicated the aroma that he could wear whenever Steve was away for extended periods of time, because smelling like someone else's shit is exactly what every man wants. That's a fact. That's 100% true. When the last piece of excrement dropped down from Steve's asshole, Tony quickly sprayed the blonde's asshole, lifted himself onto his elbows, and proceeded to clean out his fiancée's asshole. That's 3 times in one sentence with his tongue. While Tony wasn't surprised that he enjoyed the taste of Steve's ass after a healthy shit, he was shocked that he loved it so much. The remaining bits of excrement on Steve's asshole were a bit gritty, yet smooth at the same time. I have a bucket, thank God. It felt incredible on Tony's tongue, and as he swirled his tongue around the tight ring of muscle, he wished the taste would never leave his mouth. Tony, can I face you now, please? I want to see you. Steve gasped for breath, finding himself incredibly aroused and relieved after having had his bowel movement on his lover's body. Tony pulled away from Steve's asshole, and the blonde swiftly turned around and straddled Tony's hips. He leaned down and kissed Tony, pressing their chests together in the process. Steve's excrement squished between their muscular chests, causing it to ooze out and spread the expanse of their chests. When Steve pulled away and brought himself up to look at the sight below him, he found his head foggy with lust when he saw that his fiancée's chest was covered with his shit. It gave him a sense of accomplishment and pride, and Steve imagined the scent of his feces marking Tony forever, keeping him as his prize forever. He brought both of his palms down in the brown matter and smeared it further down Tony's chest, causing it to get stuck in the genius stomach hair. You know, that rule where if a word ends in S, you can put an apostrophe after the S, that doesn't apply in every case. It only applies when it sounds natural to read it that way. So you wouldn't say students' because that doesn't make sense, so it's students S apostrophe. But geniuses makes sense, so it would be genius S apostrophe S. And I'm going to focus on that grammar rule so they don't have to focus on the rest of the words on this page. Steve loved the way that the little hairs on the brunette, that's 4, chest and stomach would spring back up after their shit-covered fingers rubbed through them. And to him it symbolized just how turned on Tony's entire body was. Tony was his and his alone, and this moment proved that. Tony swiped at some of the shit on his chest with both hands and proceeded to grab Steve's ass, leaving palm and finger marks on the super soldier's ass, America's ass, alternating between wiggling his ass and slapping it. Steve moaned loudly in response when he looked down into Tony's eyes and he knew he was growing desperate with the need for release. Did this fanfiction predict Endgame? Did this fanfiction predict the America's ass bit from Endgame? I would like to think that it did not, and that no one has ever read this. But at the same time, I'm sure someone out there would like to think that it did, and that the unfortunate people that work at Disney read this at some point. "Ride me, Steve," Tony pleaded in a soft whisper, and Steve reached over and grabbed the hand sanitizer from the nightstand, poured it onto his fingers, and cleaned them before grabbing a condom from the nightstand drawer, because we wouldn't want anything gross happening, like the spread of disease, so it's very important that we practice safety with a condom, because we absolutely wouldn't want anything inside either of our rectums getting onto the person present here, being gay sex and all. Oh god. He opened the packaging, pulled the piece of latex out, and found which way it rolled out. Steve pinched the tip as he rolled the condom onto Tony's cock. Even though it had been a month ago, Steve was still nervous about Tony getting an infection in his slit after he had stretched it out, because infection is something we're very worried about. Luckily, the tissue was tightening again, and Steve could no longer fit a finger into it, which is what most human beings would call normal. After the condom was in place, Steve dug his fingers into the feces, spit into his hand, and smeared the shit and saliva mixture onto the brunette's sheath cock, using it as a makeshift natural lubricant, because avoiding infection is very important here. After Tony's cock was prepared, Steve slowly slid himself onto the brunette, that's 5, entire length. He loved the way Tony's shit-covered cock felt inside of him, and the idea of his excrement being forced back up into his body again sent a shockwave of arousal through his body. As Steve slid up and down on Tony's cock, the genius played with the feces covering his fiancée's hairy chest, enjoying the way that it felt on his fingertips. He'd never seen Steve look so beautiful. His head was thrown back, he was moving hard and fast on Tony's rock-hard dick, and his hands were placed into the finger-painted mess that was designed with the brunette's chest. Tony, knowing he wouldn't last much longer, grabbed Steve's throbbing cock and stroked it in time with his thrust, and in a matter of seconds the blonde was coming, his thick ropes of semen mixing in with the shit on the genius chest. He completely lost control when he watched Steve dip his left index finger into the cum and excrement mixture and lick it off his fingertips. Tony cried out in pleasure as he came, filling the condom's reservoir tip to the brim with because that's not how the construction of a condom works. There's one brim, it's the end that goes around your penis. There's not another brim inside of it. That's just weird. As he rode out his orgasm, because we wouldn't want to make a mess or anything, Tony gripped the base of the condom, pulled out of Steve and removed the condom before tying it up, because we wouldn't want to make a mess or anything, and tossing it in the trash can. Steve's legs felt weak and shaky from the intensity of his orgasm, and he came crashing down on Tony, knocking the wind out of him and probably smearing more shit on himself. "Sorry, Tony, you okay?" Steve asked as he swiftly rolled off of Tony and pulled him flush against his body. Yeah, amazing actually. Did you like it?" Tony questioned as he buried his face into Steve's neck before pressing a kiss to the brown-stained flesh. "I loved it. Now we should probably get in the shower and clean up," Steve said quietly as he lifted up Tony's chin with his right hand and pressed a kiss to his lips. As wonderful as getting clean together was, Steve and Tony couldn't wait to get dirty again, and they'd only have to wait until 3 in the afternoon to do it again, because people shit on a very tight schedule. 3 in the afternoon to do it again. Notes: to the anon that requested this, I have been waiting to write a scat fetish fic since the beginning, and I am so glad you prompted me and gave me this opportunity. I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I loved writing it. Smiley face. And M, thank you so much for your enthusiasm and helping me decide how I wanted to approach this. You're one of the best friends I've ever had, and I can never thank you enough for how amazing you've been. I love you. Heart. What the fuck did I just read? What the fuck did I just read? I really need to stop doing this. I don't know why I do this. You know, earlier today, I took a purity test that one of my friends sent me, and I got some score like 95 out of 100 pure. And that's because the test was based entirely on yes or no questions. But if that test was based on degree to the shit that you get up to, I would have gotten like a 0 out of 10 because I just read all of this. And you would get a 0 out of 10 because you just listened to all of this. That said, let's do a rating or fucking whatever. Grammar. Surprisingly good. There was the brunette spelling error and the thing about genius, but that's really a very minor issue. And that one thing where he said off of when you could just say off is usually correct in English writing. But not bad. Not bad grammar-wise. I'm going to have to give this an 8 out of 10 for grammar. Not out of 10 for grammar. 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 for grammar. Because I was legitimately impressed with how well the grammar was done. That being said, it's now time to give the content a score. It's now time to think critically about the content of what I just read. I want to give this a 0, but at the same time I feel like I need to reserve that for something that truly deserves it. And maybe this truly deserves it, but I feel as soon as I give a 0, I can't ever give a lower grade or another 0, because it just loses all of its meaning. So for that, I'm going to give this a 0.5. I surely didn't actually throw up during this one. That so far has only managed to happen once, thank God, even though I brought my bucket this time. But that doesn't mean that I would ever like to experience this again. On the contrary, I would like to never experience this again. I wish it never happened. I wish no one else had ever read this. I wish no one would ever listen to this. Except for I want those sweet, sweet views for those worthless internet points since I don't have enough subscribers to get monetized. So, yeah, 0.5 out of 10 for content. Thank you for watching, I guess. Too bad you had to see all of that. Please consider subscribing to my channel, it really helps me out. My current goal is to reach 50 subscribers. Once I reach 50 subscribers, I'm going to be doing a special. What that is yet, I'm not completely certain of. I might be doing a longer anthology reading in parts, and I'm also considering reading the entirety of the Lorax script all in one sitting. In addition to that, if you do subscribe, please watch my videos. Please recommend to other people. I've heard it's great if you have someone writing in your car to play the videos while they're in there because they're trapped because they asked you for a favor, and this is punishment for that. But, thank you for watching.